From Ivory Tower Populism Video Productions. This is video number 1, the Pareto Principle and Power to the People, or whoever pays the taxes establishes who gets represented. If you heard of the 80-20 rule, the Pareto Principle from the Italian economist, referring to wealth distribution in Italy, there are many manifestations of this rule, but a pertinent one is the rule that 20% of a company's clients will generate 80% of their revenue. So in this case, who do you think gets the most attention or representation from this organization? Relatedly, what is a critical problem with an oil-rich country where oil is that country's primary revenue source and the oil company is a monopoly and is state-owned? The government's revenue comes from one tightly controlled source. You get unaccountable government, unresponsive to the needs of citizens, and even repressive regimes or kleptocracies because government is not accountable to people who don't pay taxes. Now, some of those states have in fact even created some social welfare programs, but just enough to quell the complaints of the masses in order to stay in power. The moral, the more taxes you pay, the more you get represented. This argument is related to a viewpoint called resource dependence theory. The fact is, in the US, the wealthy do pay the most taxes. It's the working poor that pay so little in taxes. Take a look at this following table showing the percent of taxes paid by rich versus poor earners, measured by their adjusted gross incomes, reported on their tax forms, as reported by the IRS. As you can see, the richest earners, the top 1%, together make over 20% of total earnings, adjusted gross income, but pay 40% of total taxes. That is a very progressive tax rate. But the bottom 50% of earners, who together earn 11.6% of total income, actually pay less than 3% of total taxes. It's those in the top 5 to 10% of earners whose total earnings are proportional to taxes paid, about 11% of each. So you can see how progressive our tax rates are in the US. So, who do you believe actually gets represented by government policymaking? That the rich don't pay their fair share is a lie to distract from the true problem. Rich people get the government they want because they fund the government, taxes as well as political contributions. Crony capitalism. Poorer people are outraged that they aren't represented, but worse, they are not outraged at government corruption because they don't see it as their investment. Consider the perspective of John Rawls as he discussed the problem with what he termed welfare state capitalism and advocated the principles of a property-owning democracy. According to Rawls, the capitalist welfare state fails to maximize the diffusion of ownership of wealth and capital, true empowerment. It still permits a small elite class to control the means of production. In other words, the welfare state does little to mitigate the populist complaint that the elite protect their wealth and privilege against the masses. As a result, the disenfranchised in society, many of whom are chronically dependent on welfare, may become discouraged without ownership of productive means. In fact, cynically, you could say perhaps the purpose of welfare is to purchase just enough contentment and to create dependency so this elitist control is not challenged. Consider these facts. Look at U.S. income disparity over time after we implemented the Great Society and its income redistribution nearly 60 years ago. The Gini index is a statistical measure of distribution, representing income or wealth distribution of a nation from 0 to 1, 0 being perfect equality, 1 being one person owns everything. The US has a Gini coefficient of 0.485, actually the highest it has been in 50 years, according to the Census Bureau. Similarly, according to the American Enterprise Institute and the census data, and look the census data up yourselves, the poverty rate in the US fell by half from 1950 to the beginning of the war on poverty, from about 30% to 15%. But after the war on poverty programs began, about 1965, the poverty rate has been stuck in a narrow corridor, alternating between 11% and 15%. In the first 5 years of the war on poverty, it went from 15% to 11%. Then it went back to 15%, and it's been alternating in that band ever since. This despite federal spending well over 20 trillion in today's dollars. And in a 2008 study by economists at the OECD, found that the US had the most progressive income tax system of any industrialized country at that time. And we have one of the highest Gini coefficients. Also, note a New York Times opinion video examining actual outcomes in the most progressive states, where there are no Republicans to stand in the way of progress. The results are not good. A lot of progressive dreams failed to materialize, according to these authors. Now, their argument was that some progressives were hypocrites, but maybe the problem is bigger than that. Maybe the policies just don't work. Now, if we were to examine income disparity in states with highly progressive taxes, with generous welfare versus those without, you might see a trend. In those states with the highest inequality, you see 3 solid blue states and 1 traditionally swing state. And those with the lowest, 3 solid red states and 1 traditionally swing state. Now, I want to be clear, red states and blue states alike have failed here, as U.S. wealth and income disparity is worse than many of our peers. That's something New York and Alaska have in common. And also, with all the data here, correlation is not necessarily the same as causation. Perhaps urban versus rural is a bigger factor. I'm just saying that the currently proposed solutions have been tested and they don't seem to work. And here are the sources for this video, and this concludes video 1.